All right. So welcome everyone to the April 2015 discussions on assessing outreach efforts. My name is Carrie Creelman. I'm at the University of Houston Libraries, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. We are going to focus on strategies and outcomes for assessing outreach efforts. We will discuss assessment methods, our successes and lessons that we've learned from maybe not so successful endeavors. And we'll consider how to present assessment data to our stakeholders, how to gather and store data, and how to implement data-driven changes to outreach efforts. So before we get started, I'll encourage you to grab either a pen and paper or maybe an iPad or something to jot down some notes, and we'll sort of take it from there. So I'll ask everyone to briefly just introduce yourself and your institution, and maybe tell us what you do with assessment. And I guess I'm Carrie from the University of Houston, and I'm the coordinator of instruction and outreach. So we run a lot of outreach efforts in terms of programming or educational programming, not necessarily as many outreach efforts for sort of marketing. We have a separate committee that does that. And so I assess the programming, the impact through assessing the learning, but also looking at, who shows up and what time of day they show up to stuff and stuff like that. So somebody else want to take it away?
I could go ahead. I'm Jason Cruz. I'm the undergraduate services librarian at Northwestern University, and I am with my partner in crime, Chris Davidson. We do all the outreach efforts for the big events throughout the year at Northwestern. So in terms of assessment, we're still trying to figure out what we'd like to do is really focus on the impact. Right now, most of what we're doing is a lot of tallies, counting a number of people that show up to events, and but we're trying to generate some ideas on how we can really connect these events to awareness and impact.
Great.
I can go next. My name's Abby, Abby Anala. I am the reference and instruction librarian for business and communications at Loyola University Chicago. And we do things a little bit differently here. All of our librarians are actually just subject specialists. We don't have someone that coordinates instruction or outreach or anything like that. But we do a lot of committee work. So I am co-chair of our PR committee as well as a member of the assessment committee. And then we also have a lot of other committees like Learning Commons, speaker series, different things like that, that we all kind of work together to promote and then assess afterwards, attendance and things like that. We do not have a unified assessment plan for anything, so instruction or programming. We're kind of taking our first dive into that. We just created a program assessment survey to be distributed and kind of make changes as we see the results start coming in, but it's definitely something we all know we should be doing and we would like to be doing. And I'm kind of here to really gain some insight into how people have made it successful in the past, because we're just having trouble making it actionable right now, I think.
Okay. Jamie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jamie Segnell. I'm a reference outreach librarian at Nova Southeastern University in South Florida. And we do a lot of outreach programs, whether it's like a full-fledged program or just something where we're passing out handouts telling people about upcoming events that we're doing or services that we offer. We're fairly new to actually trying to assess the outreach. Really all we've done is look at our attendance and seen like who's come, the type of students that have come, and what time of days seem to work best. And we've tried to send out like follow-up surveys to people who have signed in, but we don't get much response for that, to try to figure out like what they're interested in seeing, how they heard about us. So we're struggling, but we're willing to try all kinds of different things.
Okay, great. Well, I think that the part of how we've introduced ourselves leads really well into my first question, which is, what kind of information are we using or are we gathering to assess our outreach currently? Attendance seems to come up quite a bit, but beyond that, what is it that everyone is gathering?
I feel like for us, attendance has even been inconsistent. Like, we're not always gathering attendance for like speaker series and things like that. Sometimes it's easy. When we do certain events, there's registration through the alumni office or something like that, and we get that count of people who showed up, or at least who registered. And that's always really nice. We're doing a program later this week actually called the Great Cartoon Debate. We're hosting 2 political cartoonists, and it's co-sponsored with the Chicago Tribune and the School of Communications. So we've got 3 big players kind of in that field, and everything is managed through a central reservation service. So we get everything from how are you affiliated with Loyola to how did you hear about this program, and we get those nice reports generated. But when we're doing the smaller in-house stuff, sometimes that data is not captured because sometimes it's not important. A lot of times, especially if it's a small middle-of-the-day program where it's just walk in, walk out kind of thing, we know that there are either undergrads or graduates. We can tell if it's convenient by time of day based on the fact that they're just physically in the building. But that doesn't mean, that's gathering our existing users, not our non-users. So I don't necessarily think that's the most efficient data or important data, but that's kind of our current situation. I wouldn't even call it a strategy. I would just call it a situation.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of in the same boat. We tend to take attendance as much as we can with our big fall outreach. It's the new student orientation event. That's it's really counting. We have a set up a tent outside of our library, and we count the interactions we have. And because we have undergraduates and graduate students and parents and new faculty, and we haven't really been able to track very well, although we'd like to, how many of what level of student we're interacting with. Often we can tell. The freshmen are often wearing their purple shirts, but we would like to be able to measure that in a different way. One thing that we've been using are these expertise cards that we have one for every subject specialist, for every subject, and we give those out to every student and faculty member that we encounter. And what we'd like to do is see if we can track that to later in the year if they're coming and talking to their subject specialist. So we do have it's hard to gather that all up because our subject specialists are all over the place. Some people have multiple subjects, and having them find out did the student come back because they had one of these cards that they got from a particular event, our fall events, and that is almost impossible to track because sometimes they come in the building and they did have a card, but they stop at the reference desk, and then the reference desk refers them, and it's just, then they say, well, somebody at the desk told me to come and talk to you. So we're still figuring this out. It hasn't been perfect.
Yeah, we're in kind of the same situation with a lot of our orientation events. We do some programming over in the residence halls at the beginning of the semester, and the number of handouts we give and things that we give with library and contact information, but we have not found a good way to assess whether or not students contact their librarians because of that event or not.
I agree. We found that a lot of our attendance and even statistics that we might want to gather but don't, is because it is based on the situation of the program. So when we do events in the dorms, we know who we're talking to. We know they're going to be freshmen or sophomores. We know, certain things. So I guess that's one of the reasons that we probably haven't prioritized certain types of data collection. But we have, I would say that for our dorm events and other just general PR things, we've stopped giving a lot of handouts and give business cards with just the phone number and the chat reference, and that's basically it. And then just show them that we're friendly and we like to help them, and then give them a lot of candy. And then they're much more likely to use that, and they say, oh, someone came to my dorm and told me about this. And that is, I would say, more efficient follow-up than them trying to ruffle through a bunch of papers at the end of the day and figure out which number they're supposed to call or who they're supposed to make an appointment with.
Yeah, that's fair. Some of the information we've been gathering with the programming that's more educational in some of our outreach efforts. We do some workshops and things like that over in some of the residences, and we do gather, that freshman, sophomore, junior, senior stuff. And even though we're in a freshman dorm, somehow we still end up with the occasional junior and senior who attend the sessions. And I always wonder, how did you get here? Because I, of course, don't find out until afterwards and I'm reviewing the data. But we're also looking at sort of, what their majors are. And we do ask them, for their preference on dates and times, beyond whether or not the current date and time that they're attending the session would be best for them, and sort of the general evaluative stuff. But one of the questions that I've started slipping in there is, just a couple of like minute paper type questions. What did you learn today? How are you going to apply that knowledge to your current or future assignments? And like most minute paper assessment, you get, a wide range of responses, some that have actually, critically thought about the content and are recoding it in ways that they're seeing application to, their assignments or whatever. And then we do get, the ones who are like, I learned what you taught me. I will use the library in the future. So there's a variety of quality there, or a variance in the quality, but it's at least initially helping us determine whether or not the workshops are worthwhile in efforts in the residences, I guess.
We were looking to capture some similar data. I don't think we've ever done a workshop in a dorm. We have done some other kinds of programming, but we use LibAnalytics to capture all of our workshop data, and major things like that are typically included. We don't have a great way of capturing anything other than library classroom or non-library classroom. That's kind of how we've quantified that. But we've also started asking, I'm looking at our follow-up survey here. One of our questions is, I'm interested in attending programs and events related to, and then the options are my academic interests, my recreational interests, Loyola's mission and vision, or other, and let them fill that in so we know if they want that more academic, like things specific to my major, if they want other skills they're not learning in the classroom, or something completely unrelated and fun. Like we had Cards Against Humanity come to campus this year, and it was completely standing room only. They loved it, and I'm sure they would love to have us do more and more stuff like that. But the people who made that game live in our neighborhood. That was an easy one to do. Not everyone. You can't always just manufacture interesting people like that to come to your community.
Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned LibAnalytics,
Mm-hmm.
And we use that as well. Is anybody using anything else to sort of track and store your data?
We just
We
use
use
like
LibAnalytics.
You do too. Jamie, what were you saying?
Oh, I'm sorry. We just use like a spreadsheet where we're just tallying up who came, how many, like what college they're from, or level that they're in.
Yeah, we use LibAnalytics, and then I use spreadsheets to do a little bit more in-depth analysis, or tracking of my own stuff.
One of the issues that I find when I'm doing like a follow-up survey, in addition to them not responding, but even if I have them face-to-face, is I run into the obstacle where they'll tell me they want something, and then I go and do it, and they still don't come to it. Like they'll say, let's have the program, we had a lunchtime program, and they said, this would be great, but if it was in the evening, I could come. And then we offer it in the evening a couple of times, and no one shows up. So that's one of the things that we struggle with, too, that we're trying to give them what they want, but then when we do, it's still not showing a higher attendance.
Yeah, that's a problem that we run into as well, and I think that's one of the known issues with drop-in workshops, right? We all experience that. Getting the right timing, the right date, the right place, the right point of need for students in the semester is just, you're taking a shot in the dark. basically. And that's what, I mean, gathering that information is helpful, of course, and helpful for planning. We just offered a workshop in the residence last Wednesday that no one attended. And after 20 minutes, we just left. We called it. And that's never happened to us before. You know, no idea why. There were a few other things going on, so we had some competition that maybe we don't always have. But trying to figure out, trying to assess that failure, I guess, why did we have no one come? Because we'd done the exact same thing we have done previously in terms of scheduling at the point in the semester and communication and promotion through the RAs and through, you know, their email and stuff. Nobody showed up. No clue.
I think that's one of the toughest parts, is that trying to assess why there was no attendance is there's like 100 variables. It could have been, you know, including the weather or, you know, bad timing, bad date, and so one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years is our pop-up libraries. We do this at our student center, and we just set up a table, and we have a laptop, and we answer reference questions. And I think we started actually in the res halls, and that was a gigantic failure. We tried that multiple times. We had somebody who was doing the promotion for us. We had RAs helping us, and it just didn't really go anywhere. And then we set up in the student center. It was slow, but we could see that there was an awareness. They started noticing us, and we're like, what are you doing over here? So it started off very slow, and so we've been building up, and I think we had our most successful quarter this past quarter. I don't have any numbers, but it's really just tracking these questions and figuring, you know, we write down what the question was. Often it's what are you doing here? What are these cards? And you know, we get the conversation going. So we do try to take that, you know, the awareness part of it as that's a value, trying to translate that into something that you can put in an annual report isn't often an easy way to do it, but we can at least start, you know, as we build this awareness, then we know that people will expect to see us there, at least with this particular activity.
We had a very similar situation. We did what we thought was an awesome program. We partnered with the Career Center and a dorm, the Honors Dorm, and offered Myers-Briggs tests. So they took the Myers-Briggs test online with the Career Center, and then we would come into the dorm the next day or a week later or something and do a Myers-Briggs type and study skills workshop. So now you know your type, we'll talk about type, and then we'll talk about study skills and places on campus that will facilitate learning for each Myers-Briggs type. And we had about 8 or 10 people log in, take the Myers-Briggs online, and then nobody showed up to the follow-up session. And they couldn't even get their results without coming to the session. They had no way of getting them. So I don't know what they just thought they took this test and that was the end of the road, got no results from it. But I mean, and it was really only the people who even lived in that building that took the test. So we're kind of with you there, Jason. We don't really know what the breakdown between getting them to register and take the test, which should have been the hardest part, and walking down a set of stairs to have a conversation about it afterwards. But
wow. So Jason, I wanted to follow up. So in the residence halls, I guess putting words in your mouth here, but that would have been what you consider a failure compared to the student success, or the student center, which you would consider a success. And if those are okay words to use, what data were you gathering that enabled you to sort of reach those conclusions?
I guess failure is a strong word, but I would say it was a failure in a good sense, that it was we tried it out. It sort of set us up for figuring out what we needed to do next. Mm-hmm. We were really just collecting the number of questions we got and the types of questions. And if it was a reference question, which we occasionally did get, we'd write down what the text was of the question. The reason it was a failure is because we figured out really quickly that being set up in a res dining hall, they just weren't in the moment of that kind of they weren't ready for a reference question. It wasn't on their mind. They were there to eat. And we just saw this over and over. They weren't really interested in looking at us. They didn't care. It was like one, they had their mind on one thing, and that was just eating and getting back to whatever they were doing. So when we set up in our student center, it's similar, but we're set up right across from a Starbucks that's in the student center, which has an unnaturally long wait, we found, which is good because people are kind of milling around and waiting for their coffee, and then we're sitting right there. They kind of look over and go, oh, while I'm waiting, what are you doing here? A lot of people stop and they go, oh, I was just on my way to the library, because it's really close. It's the buildings are right next to each other, so they're sort of in between. They're not in the comfort of their dorm. They're not just throwing on some sweatpants to go get some cereal, and then heading back up, which is what we found. So in that sense, it wasn't a failure. We did great partnerships through that, those activities, and we still work with them to do promotion. It's just that we found our right location after trial and error.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I don't usually think of failure as a negative word, and maybe I'm going to readjust there, because I think we can, this is why we do assessment, is to learn from when something doesn't meet our expectations or our hopes. Mm-hmm. I'll say that instead of failure. How do we make it more successful, or how do we define that? And that's based on typically our assessment criteria, or hopefully anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think failure came out, but I wouldn't say that's exactly what it was. The location choice failed, and I think you made a good point just now, is that we felt like everything was set up exactly right. We thought, how could we miss on this? We're in the res halls. They're walking right by us. We have the director of residential academic initiatives who's been promoting this and getting the RAs, and we thought, there's no way we couldn't just get nobody, but we often got nobody, and but we adjusted, and I think we figured out something good.
It's amazing how influential location can be. Part of what I do is I liaise to our athletics department, so I work with a lot of our student athletes. And I go a couple times a week over to their building where they have their study hours, where they spend a lot of time in between classes and practice and stuff, and I set up office hours there. And I've done this for the last few semesters, but I've experimented with different locations, different rooms, or different partnerships. Sundays, Mondays, I'm in the football study hall. Tuesdays, I'm in a different room, and I've been playing around with where I'm located, and it makes such a difference. I can have the same day, the same hours, one semester to another, but the location means I have, double or triple the traffic one semester than another. Or maybe it's the class schedule, or maybe it's something else entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our popular places to set up a table is in our student union, and that's kind of hit or miss too, only because our student union has 2 dining halls, a movie theater, the gym, like basically everything, so students are very frequently on the go through there. They're not really milling about, they're trying to get someplace typically in a pretty timely manner, but also that's where most, I think probably I would go with 80% of the tables that are set up on campus are in the area, and so a lot of times it's people trying to get you to sign a petition or to sign up for something, and so sometimes the students just have their blinders on and they just walk right past you because they don't want to give anyone their email address that day, and that's not even what we're asking, but I think there's that kind of association with that table being in that space is something that is more of a solicitation versus, I guess, an invitation to have a conversation.
Yeah. So Jason, you had mentioned annual report.
Yeah.
And the data that you put in that annual report, which it brings me to one of the things I was thinking about is, the data we gather for a reason, right? One reason, of course, is to improve our programming and to make the changes necessary to better define success. But the other is we share that data. We share that data with our stakeholders, sometimes through an annual report, sometimes through different methods. So my question for everyone, I guess, is, you know, who are you sharing that with, and how are you sharing that information? How is outreach programming assessed by your stakeholders?
I'm not sure how they're using the data, honestly. We put it out there. We submit it to, you know, when we're doing our own evaluations, when we're doing departmental annual reports. I send the information out. We tend to, for our really big events, we send out the information to the whole library. And the reason is, I think we've lucked out over the last 3 years or so, where our numbers just have keep going up and up and up and up. But so it's been easy to say, wow, look, we interacted with 2,000 people this you know, this time we were out there for a week, and you know, really just use it as a method also to thank all the people that helped. I try to use it in so many different ways to accomplish, you know, getting volunteers for next year and really bringing it in front of the administration's eyes that these are worthwhile efforts. You know, we're catching them as they come in, and this leads into the next event, which we do an event called Explore Your Library Day, which is usually a couple weeks after the beginning of the school year, and it's like a game type thing. It changes often every year. Last year we did Clue, like sort of like a whodunit mystery. But we try to connect those two events and really push those numbers out to everybody. Again, I don't know what administration really does with those numbers. If they add those to the other things, it would be nice. I think they're taking more of an interest in these things, really trying to get beyond just the instruction, you know, the instruction stats and the number of reference questions and the number of volumes. To what extent everything's being collected and analyzed, I'm just not sure. Beyond what I do with it.
Great.
Yeah, for us, we run into the issue where our outreach gets reported slightly different depending on the type of outreach that it is. So we don't always have true like outreach numbers because it might have been reported slightly differently. For example, if I go over to our athletic study hall and I have like a drop-in program where they just know that the librarian's there and they could come ask me reference questions. If nobody actually approaches me, I might go around to them and just say, to the few people in the room, I might say, oh, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm here for. And so it's only like a minute or two that I'm talking to each one. But then if one of them then does take me up on their offer and we do like a consultation, we end up counting it more of like a library appointment that we had. So then that statistic ends up getting counted separate than if I just went around the room introducing myself to the 5 students there. So we have a hard time making sure that we know exactly what we got from each outreach if there's multiple types being counted different ways in like an annual report.
I agree with Jamie. We have a hard time adequately capturing that. And I guess I agree with Jason too, and I don't really know what they do with it after we report it. But we do, since again we don't have an outreach department necessarily, each committee will report on the things that they did and attendance and things like that. But I don't know if it carries the same meaning because it is so isolated that, you know, Learning Commons offered 5 programs and attracted collectively 300 participants. That doesn't really tell the whole story of how the program was advertised and how it was promoted and who the attendees actually were, what time of day, things like that. It doesn't really get the full picture. And I think part of that just has to do with the structure. You know, the Learning Commons will plan an event, they'll bring in a speaker, let's say, but then it's the PR committee's responsibility to do all the publicity, and then it's the assessment committee's responsibility to do the post-assessment. So that's really 3 different committees for that one program, which honestly, it fosters a lot of collaboration and a lot of teamwork. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that system, but I do think something gets lost in translation from the steps taken to actually do this program and then reporting it into, you know, that nice bullet point summary for administration to read at the end.
Yeah. Thinking about what Jamie was saying with athletics, it was one of the meetings I had last semester, actually, was with a couple of our administrators saying, you know, I don't know that I'm capturing the right kind of data for our interactions over in athletics. How are you using this? What do you need? What is the story you need to be able to tell? And what additional data could I gather to help get us there? And that, you know, not only do I track interactions versus consultations and the questions and whatever, but I'm also tracking the time. So, you know, the minute interaction, like every person I talk to basically when I'm over there gets written down. The nature of the interaction, the amount of time it was compared to the amount of time I'm spent. So at the end of the semester, I'm looking at, you know, I spent X number of hours. From those X number of hours, I had Y number of consultations and spent, you know, Z number of minutes in consultation on reference question versus, you know, Y number of interactions accounting for X number of minutes of my however many hours.
Do you have a field in your LibAnalytics for, I guess, like athletics table, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, because we track type of question, type of student, et cetera, but we don't really have a field for, I mean, I guess we have in-person or email or whatever, but do you have anything that says that I was at this physical location when this happened?
I don't have a field for athletics specifically, and what I do is I actually keep track of this in a Google spreadsheet.
Okay.
That's where I take all of my additional detail, and then I go to LibAnalytics and I put in, you know, what we count for LibAnalytics to go to the larger number of consultations. But on an annual basis, I provide a separate report to our administration on athletics.
Okay.
And that's where I provide the extra detail that we don't capture in our LibAnalytics.
And is that because you're the liaison, so each liaison would capture that uniquely for
Nope.
them? No, just you?
That is because national competitiveness of our athletics programming is one of the big goals or whatever for our institution, and we need to be able to articulate completely separately from student success and undergraduate research and everything. We need to be able to articulate how we support athletic competitiveness and keeping our student athletes eligible academically through hours spent over there and interactions, et cetera, is how we are trying to make that one work.
That's a very unique responsibility. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when it's been very interesting for me to think about how I assess those interactions and the data that I gather and how that turns into a story. And because it does vary so much from semester to semester based on, I don't know, the day, the time, the hour, the schedule of the students, the whatever, you know, it's not necessarily just number-based, because that might change. And that's where we started talking about interactions. You know, I need to be able to count the number of times I say hi to someone I helped, you know, 2 semesters ago. But now we, you know, it's like, hey, how's it going? How are these? Oh, you don't have any research papers this semester, but how's life or whatever? Because that counts as our visibility over there. They recognize me as the librarian, and they'll tell their friends, or it's not successful, but it's trying to get at that impact. But of course, you know, there's no direct link there.
We have an instruction form in LibAnalytics that is now being used to sort of capture everything, because we have all of these weird, disparate activities that we do that are sort of instruction, sort of not, and so it was decided that we'd capture all of these together. A lot of our special collections, our archives, they do really unique activities that technically is an instruction, but we our administration wanted to make sure it was counted because they are doing this outreach to, and in some senses, instruction. Over the last year, I was working with our Office of Undergraduate Research and our Office of Fellowships on these presentations to departments. So we would go out and we'd all speak together at these one-off sessions that would be like 1 hour. Am I getting an echo? I feel like I'm getting an echo here. Okay.
I hear a little bit of one, but I don't know where it's coming from.
So we would do these events, and it was another thing where it's not exactly an instruction session, but I go and I give a spiel about what the library can do, especially in regards to writing up undergraduate research grants or proposals for fellowships, and that's been really great. We've actually been able to see returns on this. Again, it's hard to track it, but we've seen an uptick in students coming in, contacting librarians to talk about their undergraduate research grant proposal and really figure out if the research that they want to do is something that they can submit a proposal for, and they've been referred to us by the Office of Undergraduate Research as well. It's just, but it is one of those things that I'm tracking on the instructions sheet. It's not. I guess we're just really just grouping all these things together and as instruction and outreach.
Well, and that's one of the things that's challenging, right? Is how do you differentiate between instruction-related outreach or educational outreach compared to marketing or promotional outreach? And do you distinguish between that with the statistics, with the reporting out to the stakeholders, et cetera?
I think I personally distinguish it based on the strategy involved. I'm a little bit of a unique case because I actually have a huge pet peeve about the word outreach. I hate it. I try to not ever use it because I do think it's just so ambiguous and it doesn't actually effectively communicate anything that you're doing besides reaching out, which again something gets lost in translation there. And I guess from our organizational perspective, the instructional component wouldn't be considered outreach. Like I think that's what we would consider to be instruction, and then outreach, I guess if you're going to use that word for us, would be more of trying to increase chat numbers. For example, our chat numbers were dropping off, so we had a promotional table to invite people to come try it out, and would. That's one of those things. We were in the student center and a lot of people walked past us, but a lot of people did stop and our numbers went up after that. But all of that, should be a part of your overall marketing plan, and whatever your goal is. I think that's the only way you can even effectively assess it, is if you're doing these things in a coordinated effort to reach a goal at the end. Otherwise, you're just kind of sporadically hosting events for, what point and purpose? I know we always have a point and purpose, but I think it communicates much more effectively if you are doing it for that overall strategy.
And it's always nice when that's articulated in the form of, an assessment, an outreach plan or whatever you're calling it that's not outreach.
Well, and I think that kind of gives us a justification to do those things to begin with. If we have our goals from the outset from a marketing plan, and we say we're going to do these 6 or 7 things to achieve those goals, and then be able to report on whether or not we've actually done them, I think that is a lot more of a clear tool for reporting to administration or even just internally to figure out if what we did worked, rather than saying, oh, we have a good idea, let's do this information table or whatever it is, and then figure out whether or not it was successful. We kind of have our measurements for success in place beforehand.
So outreach is the means to an end rather than being the end in and of itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is interesting if you have people who are responsible for outreach as their position. Like how does that change? How does that mean when you are the outreach librarian?
Well, I guess for us we don't have one, so that takes care of that. But
yeah,
we've tried to do that as we're doing these, a lot of these events that we've been doing have existed long before we had somebody who was focused on outreach. It was just all over the place, and everybody was doing these events. So there's been a more coordinated effort, and we try to keep in mind, although we've been without an assessment librarian for about a year and a half now. So while we usually decide right away, do we even need to assess this at all? I mean, if we're just doing it as an awareness event, then why do we need the tick marks? It's not really, we're not going to use it for anything. So we've done that before, but otherwise we usually just have it in our mind that this is how we were tracking it in the past. So with the orientation event in the fall quarter, that's been going on for several years, and we've just been tracking it in the same way. And a lot of times we use it just internally to decide, you know what, we're not doing those hour-long tours anymore. It's a waste of time. It's too much investment, and we're not getting the return. So we switch to 10-minute tours, and those have been. We've been able to track the, even if the numbers might, if you compare it to several years ago, might look the same. It's actually, it's like, well, we did 3 days worth of tours and we hit 500 students, and then we did 2 hours of tours and we hit 500 students. So, the return there is much better. So but I agree. It's having a set plan at the beginning would be ideal, and then sort of distinguishing between what, is this just general awareness outreach, or or what is the end goal out of this event? Because I think those have value too, those one-offs that you're just like, let's try this out. We're not counting it as anything. We just want to, test it out, try an awareness event.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Jamie, how about you? You actually have outreach in your title, right? How do you find that planning and that aspect of assessment and planning factors in for you?
Yeah, it's a struggle because I relate to what you all are saying, and like not even really liking the word or wanting to use the word outreach, because I always feel that the type of outreach falls into one of those other categories that gets reported. So we have like a little form if any one of the librarians goes and does an outreach, and we're trying to like mark off like where was it and what did we do. We only check the box for outreach if it is like just one of those like minute interactions where it's like, hi, did you know we have this event coming up, and just promoting or letting them know that we're there. And then if we do any other type of library service, regardless of where it's located, we'll categorize it as, was it a class? If it's a class in the library, we might not count it as outreach, but if we do that same class over in the athletic building, then that's when we count it as the outreach. But then at the end of the day, when it gets assessed and pulled into a report, it sometimes loses that umbrella that it was an outreach, and it just shows, oh, we did this many classes. But it might not say how many of those were an outreach effort where we did it outside of the library. Maybe they'll mark the location on the report. I don't know. And if they don't, then it just kind of sounds like we did this amount of classes, but who knows how much was where, and did we actually venture out of our library building and try to find students where they are as opposed to them coming to us. We also recently went through a department merger at our library where we merged our reference and our distance instructional departments into one. So it's kind of new to us because we realized some of the things that one department was reporting was slightly different the way that they were reporting it from one department to the next. So now we're just trying to streamline so that we're all on the same page, which is good moving forward. But looking back, we don't really know exactly what we had going on because the different reports don't align 100%. So it's a learning experience.
Yeah, I bet. The consistency across multiple departments or across unified departments is a difficult one.
Yes.
And yeah, no, I really get what you're saying about, how do you define outreach compared to instruction, and Abby, you were talking about this too. I mean, it's something that my title is coordinator of undergraduate instruction and outreach, and so those two things within our liaison services library or department, those two things have to be separate because there's two components to my title, right? But then, well, what does that mean? And how do we define outreach? Because we have a campus engagement committee for the library that's outside of our department. And so what's the difference between the campus engagement committee and outreach within liaison services and outreach within what each individual subject librarian does? And then how do you assess all of those things, and how do you define and label them in a way that is productive for that conversation? Because we do the same thing, right? If we teach workshops over in the residence halls, that counts as a class or an instruction session, but it counts as a non-course related instruction session. But it also counts as an outreach activity for our department. And so you sort of say, well, this semester or this year we did X number of non-course related sessions. Of those X number, Y number were outreach sessions in the residence halls or instruction sessions in the athletic center or whatever. But it starts to get really complicated. And then of course, if we look at the efforts we do with the residence centers, how do you qualify or how do you distinguish between the promotional events, like where we just set up and it's a drop-in table and we're just advertising liaison services and the subject librarians through games and through trivia and stuff, compared to a workshop or session? And does that event at the beginning of the semester result in attendance at those later workshops?
I feel like we're definitely not the only people experiencing this.
Yeah.
I think it's a big problem within librarianship of just we haven't normalized that terminology. I think that outreach is kind of one of those buzzwords like assessment was a few years ago, where we know we should be doing it, but we haven't really picked out how or why or the strategy. And I think a lot of that comes from most librarians' lack of knowledge of marketing terminology. It's again another pet peeve. I just get so aggravated when people misuse words like because they're not the same. And I used to be a marketing librarian for a public library, and I would get so confused when my boss would ask me to do something, because one day it was we need an advertisement, the next day it was we need a promotion, the next day it was we need publicity. And because to some people they're all the same, but to people who are trying to make it actionable and turn these ideas into action items, they're not the same. And I think that it's hard from a librarian perspective when we're all using those different terms to describe what we think is the same thing. There's a lack of consistency, which is fine. That's how new ideas start, right? Is that I interpreted it this way, so I did X, Y, Z, and then I can learn from what you did. But at some point, it also becomes problematic because we literally have no communication tool to effectively communicate even within each other, let alone to other non-librarians or non-library departments about what.
I think that's probably the problem with being able to assess any of this, is if we all can't get on the same page with what it's called, then how do you track it?
Right.
Well, and there are frequently factors that influence that beyond libraries. It's what does your institution dictate? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things within our library, within our university. Our department has defined what outreach means for us and for our instruction and outreach team, separate from all of the subject librarians, where outreach might mean something a little bit different there. And that we've defined that as separate from what the Campus Engagement Committee, and that goes into our annual plan and stuff like that for our department.
Well, that's helpful that you can at least communicate within yourselves then what that means. That's got to be much easier than trying to figure it out day by day who's responsible for what.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. But so we have just a few minutes left, 7-8 minutes left, so I wanted to make sure that if there are lingering questions or comments that y'all wanted to bring up or address or ask or anything like that, that we have an opportunity for some final thoughts or questions or anything that you wanted to get out of this discussion, ideas, pleas for help.
I guess my main question is it's just basically what is it, and it might just be for something each institution needs to think about, is what is it that you actually want to assess? Like, do you want to assess like the satisfaction of like student satisfaction of the event or the program, or is it that you're trying to assess like how did they hear about it and what times of days would work best? So just kind of thinking like what is it that we're trying to get out of the assessment piece would be important for us, because this is fairly new to us and it's something we haven't quite explored yet. So I guess that's a good place to start maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it varies by event a lot of the times. You know, and especially if we're in a pilot phase, we are looking at days, times, satisfaction. Right? Once a program's a little bit more established, we're starting to look at student learning. How do we assess the student learning within whatever is happening, whether it's a consultation in athletics or whether it's, you know, a workshop or an event or whatever. And then, you know, the thing that Jason mentioned in the very, very beginning is impact. How is that event or that interaction impacting the library as a whole and that student's relationship with the library? Are they coming to see their subject librarian because they played Guess Who featuring subject librarians, you know, and walked away with that little card or whatever? So it really varies. I know that doesn't answer anything, Jamie, sorry.
No, but that helps because that makes me think of all the different things that you might be assessing and why and when.
Yeah, I would agree. Our when we were talking about our program survey that we were going to start distributing, the longest component of our discussion was, is this the same survey that's going to go out at the end of workshops and at the end of instruction sessions and at the end of fun programs? And and that's kind of where we came up with that question of, I'm interested in more programs related to my major or fun things or Loyola or whatever. So we could kind of have that flexibility, but we all know that people attend these different programs for a variety of different reasons, and if you're there to see Cards Against Humanity, you might not be there to see RefWorks also, and that's fine, but capturing that becomes very important. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a survey for each type of program that you're going to offer, but being aware of what you're choosing to capture at each stage, I think, becomes your vital decision. There's no way to effectively capture everything at one time with one survey. There's just not, which would be great, but there's no magic survey, I don't think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Any final comments or questions?
It's nice to know we're all going through the same thing.
Definitely.
Yes. Okay. Well, in case any of you have meetings at the top of the hour, I guess we'll end just a couple minutes early here so you can dash off to those. And I'd like to thank each of you for joining the discussion today. Hopefully you have a few takeaways, and hopefully we'll see you in a future discussion session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Have a good week.
You too.
Bye.